May 1944, Central Germany. Midday light falls across a synthetic fuel plant as warning sirens begin to rise. Slow, hollow, unmistakable. A German oil officer stands near the control building, eyes fixed on the sky. High above the clouds, the distant hum grows louder. Then the first silver shapes appear, filling the horizon in organized lines. American bombers. Hundreds of them. Within minutes, the ground will shake. Pipes will rupture. Tanks will burn. And Germany's fuel lifeline will begin to vanish, faster than anyone believed possible. By the time the sirens sounded in May 1944, Germany was already fighting a war it could no longer easily fuel. Unlike the United States or the Soviet Union, the Third Reich possessed almost no natural petroleum reserves. Its armies, air forces, and industry depended on a fragile system built from imports, substitutes, and chemical innovation. This vulnerability was known long before the first American bomber crossed the German frontier. Germany's answer to its oil shortage was synthetic fuel. Beginning in the 1920s and expanded aggressively under the Nazi regime, coal hydrogenation plants converted vast quantities of coal into aviation gasoline, diesel, and lubricants. By 1939, companies like IG Farben operated major facilities at Leuna, Bohlen, Politz, and Brooks. These plants were marvels of industrial chemistry, massive, complex, and absolutely essential. By 1943, synthetic fuel supplied more than half of Germany's total petroleum needs and nearly all its aviation fuel. For years, German planners believed these installations were safe. They were large, dispersed, heavily defended, and located deep inside the Reich. Early Allied bombing efforts focused on cities, factories, and transportation networks, leaving fuel plants damaged but functioning. Oil officers and engineers learned to repair pipelines quickly, replace cracked reactors, and keep production flowing under difficult conditions. Confidence grew. Not that the war would be easily won, but that fuel production could survive bombing long enough to outlast the enemy. That confidence extended upward into German leadership. Hermann Göring assured Hitler that air defenses could protect critical industry. The Luftwaffe, though increasingly strained, was still expected to defend the homeland. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments, warned of synthetic fuel vulnerability, but until 1944, oil remained only one target among many. Yet beneath the surface, the system was brittle. Synthetic plants depended on precision machinery, high-pressure reactors, constant electricity, and uninterrupted chemical processes. A single bomb could trigger fires that burned for days. Repairs required skilled labor, specialized parts, and time. Resources Germany was running out of. And far beyond German planning rooms, American strategists were beginning to take notice of exactly where Germany's war effort truly depended. While German planners measured fuel production in tons and repair schedules in days, Allied strategy was undergoing a decisive shift. By late 1943, it was no longer enough to bomb Germany's ability to manufacture weapons. The question facing Allied air commanders was simpler and more ruthless. What kept the German war machine moving? The answer was oil. American air doctrine, shaped by the U.S. Army Air Forces, favored precision daylight bombing. The 8th Air Force, operating from Britain, and the 15th Air Force, flying from bases in Italy, now possessed the numbers and reach to strike deep inside Germany. More importantly, they had something they had previously lacked: long-range escort fighters. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang meant bomber formations could now be protected all the way to their targets and back. By early 1944, Allied analysts identified synthetic fuel plants as Germany's most critical vulnerability. These facilities were few in number, difficult to replace, and impossible to rapidly relocate. Unlike ball-bearing factories or aircraft plants, fuel installations could not be dispersed into small workshops. Every plant destroyed removed a large percentage of national output. After months of debate, the decision was made. In the spring of 1944, oil targets moved to the top of the bombing priority list. American planners timed the campaign carefully, coordinating fuel strikes with preparations for the invasion of Western Europe. If Germany ran out of fuel, its aircraft could not fly, its tanks could not maneuver, and its reserves could not respond to Allied breakthroughs. The first major oil raids in May 1944 were not symbolic attacks. They were systematic. Luna, Politz, Balin, Brooks. Each strike was designed to shut down production, ignite storage tanks, and overwhelm repair crews. Bombers returned again and again, striking the same installations before repairs could be completed. German oil officers began to notice the pattern almost immediately. This was no longer harassment. It was annihilation by repetition. And as black smoke rose from shattered refineries, it became clear that the next phase of the war would be decided not only on beaches or battlefields, but inside burning fuel plants watched helplessly from the ground. Inside Germany's synthetic fuel plants, the war did not arrive with rifles or tanks. It arrived with clipboards, pressure gauges, and repair schedules that no longer made sense. Oil officers and engineers, many civilians, many career specialists, watched years of technical work disappear in hours. After each raid, they walked through twisted pipes, shattered compressors, and pools of burning gasoline, calculating losses they already understood were irreversible. These men were not frontline soldiers, yet the weight they carried was immense. They knew exactly what each damaged unit meant in tonnage lost, and what that loss meant for pilots, tank crews, and transport columns across Europe. By June 1944, reports from fuel officers became grimly uniform. Production restored to partial capacity, spare parts delayed, skilled labor unavailable, electricity unreliable. The system was bleeding faster than repairs could stop. What unsettled them most was the precision. Bombs were not falling randomly. Cracking towers, hydrogenation units, power plants. The Americans knew where to hit. Synthetic fuel plants were wonders of chemistry, but terrible fortresses. Their machinery worked under extreme pressure and heat. Pipes ran in tight clusters. Reactors towered exposed above ground. Storage tanks were massive, thin-skinned, and flammable. While flak could deter low-level attacks, it could not stop high-altitude precision bombing from destroying essential processes. Once damaged, these plants were fragile. Restarting production required synchronized systems: electricity, cooling, catalysts, trained crews. A refinery might look repairable from the air, but internally, it was paralyzed. Even minor bomb damage could shut down output for weeks. The Americans quickly learned this. They did not need to destroy everything. They only needed to break the rhythm of production. For U.S. bomber crews, oil became a familiar name on mission boards. The same targets appeared again and again. Crews joked darkly that they could navigate to Linya without maps. This was by design. American planners understood that repeated strikes caused cumulative collapse, not just physical damage, but exhaustion throughout Germany's repair system. And it was this relentless pressure, from air and from arithmetic, that prepared the ground for even deeper consequences. As fuel production collapsed, denial became impossible, even at the highest levels of the Reich. Albert Speer, Germany's Minister of Armaments, received daily reports showing dramatic drops in output. Charts once measured in tens of thousands of tons now showed fractions. Emergency memos circulated faster than replacement parts. In meetings, Speer warned that fuel, not weapons, was becoming the decisive factor of the war. Hermann Göring, responsible for Germany's air defense and the Luftwaffe, reacted with anger and disbelief. He had promised that German flak and fighter forces could protect the Reich's vital industries. Yet by mid-1944, fuel shortages grounded his own interceptors. Aircraft sat fully built, but unflyable. Training hours were slashed. Experienced pilots were ordered to conserve fuel rather than fly patrols, even as American bomber streams crossed Germany daily. For German oil officers, the most devastating moment was not the explosion. It was the silence afterward. Refineries stood intact but useless. Gauges no longer moved. Storage tanks stood empty. The numbers told a story no speech could soften. Aviation fuel production dropped by more than 90% in some regions within weeks. Men trained to measure output now measured absence. They watched tank trains arrive and leave half empty. They signed reports knowing they no longer mattered. Fuel scarcity became a form of quiet terror, an invisible threat spreading through every branch of the military. The realization spread quickly. This was not damage that time could fix. The oil campaign demonstrated a brutal truth of modern warfare. An enemy can be defeated without destroying its armies directly. American bombers did not need to overrun fuel plants. They only had to deny their function. No fuel meant no movement, no flight, no recovery. And by late summer 1944, Germany stood at that threshold. Its war machine intact in appearance, but hollow at its core. That hollow space would soon become undeniable when the numbers turned catastrophic. The decisive phase began in mid-May 1944, when the American oil campaign shifted from theory to sustained destruction. On May 12th, more than 900 bombers of the U.S. 8th Air Force crossed into central Germany. Their target was not a factory producing weapons, but the heart of Germany's fuel system, the Luna synthetic fuel complex near Merseburg. Luna was no ordinary plant. It was the largest synthetic fuel facility in Europe, supplying aviation gasoline crucial to the Luftwaffe. German oil officers watching that day understood its importance better than anyone. When the bombers appeared, they did not scatter blindly. They held formation. Bomb bay doors opened in unison. High explosive and incendiary loads fell with calculated precision. Within minutes, the plant was burning across multiple sectors. Hydrogenation units were ruptured. Power stations knocked offline. Fire spread into interconnected systems designed for uninterrupted flow. Black smoke rose thousands of meters into the air, visible for hours. What shocked German observers was not the damage, it was the certainty of it happening again. 3 days later, bombers returned. Then again, by late May, American forces expanded the assault to Politz, Bohlen, Zeitz, and Brooks. The pattern became unmistakable. Repairs began. Bombers returned. Fires reignited. Pipelines collapsed a second time. Temporary fixes never reached completion. German oil officers filed production estimates that collapsed with each revision. Where Luna had once delivered fuel in the tens of thousands of tons per month, output fell to a fraction within weeks. Emergency measures, rationing catalysts, improvising repairs, cannibalizing other plants, only slowed the collapse, never stopped it. Meanwhile, American losses dropped. Escort fighters dominated the skies. German interceptors, short on fuel themselves, appeared sporadically and ineffectively. Flak batteries remained active, but could not prevent repeated strikes against the same critical systems. By early June 1944, the numbers told a brutal truth. Germany's aviation fuel production had fallen by nearly half. Some plants were producing almost nothing. Oil officers ceased planning output in weeks and began planning in if-at-all terms. This was no longer attrition. It was systemic failure unfolding in real time. And as June moved forward, the campaign accelerated, its effects spreading far beyond refineries and into every branch of Germany's military power. By July 1944, the collapse of Germany's fuel system was no longer a projection. It was measurable reality. American bombers now struck oil targets with relentless rhythm, sometimes hitting the same installations twice within a single week. Each raid erased what little progress repair crews had made since the last. German oil officers began to use a new phrase in internal reports: Dauerstillstand, permanent shutdown. Leuna burned again in early July. Politz followed. Bohlen's cracking units were knocked out repeatedly. At Brooks, fires raged for days, consuming storage tanks faster than they could be emptied. Rail lines feeding the plants were severed. Power grids failed. Entire complexes sat dark and silent, while American reconnaissance aircraft photographed the damage with a calm efficiency. Production figures collapsed at a speed few believed possible. In April 1944, Germany produced more than 180,000 tons of aviation fuel. By August, Output had fallen by over 90%. The numbers left no room for interpretation. Oil officers no longer debated recovery. They documented disappearance. The consequences rippled outward immediately. The Luftwaffe was hit first. Fighter units received orders limiting training flights. Some squadrons were grounded entirely, their aircraft fully armed but unflyable. Experienced pilots were ordered into combat with minimal flight hours, while replacements received almost none. Jet fighters, once seen as a future equalizer, consumed fuel Germany no longer had. On the ground, armored divisions felt the same paralysis. Panzer units conserved fuel by avoiding maneuvers. Training halted. Vehicles were stripped for parts and left immobilized. Strategic reserves existed on paper, but could not be moved in meaningful numbers. German oil officers watched their ledgers empty, while frontline commanders sent increasingly desperate requests. Fuel allocations shrank to symbolic quantities. Emergency stockpiles were burned through, then gone. Inside Speer's ministry, the conclusion was inescapable. Germany's armed forces still existed, but motionless. The machine was intact, yet starved. By late summer 1944, American bombers had achieved what no previous campaign had managed. In less than 90 days, they had crippled the fuel lifeline of an industrial state. And once that lifeline broke, the war entered a phase from which Germany would never recover. When the smoke finally thinned in late summer 1944, the consequences of the oil campaign became unmistakable across every front. Germany still possessed armies, aircraft, and factories, but they existed in a new condition: immobility. What oil officers had recorded in production charts now appeared in operational reports from the battlefield. The Luftwaffe's decline accelerated dramatically. Fighter units that once flew daily sorties could now operate only in short bursts, conserving fuel for emergencies. Pilot training all but collapsed. By autumn, replacement pilots were entering combat with a fraction of the flight hours once considered essential. Aircraft losses could no longer be offset by experience or sustained operations. On land, panzer forces suffered a similar fate. Entire armored divisions were reduced to defensive roles, unable to maneuver freely. Commanders postponed operations not due to enemy strength, but because fuel trains could not arrive. Vehicles were parked under camouflage, engines silent, crews waiting for fuel that never came. Even retreat became difficult when reserves could not be mobilized. Transport systems felt the strain as well. Railways, already damaged by bombing, lost the fuel needed to move repair crews and supplies. Coal deliveries backed up. Ammunition sat idle without locomotives to carry it. The war economy slowed, then stumbled. Inside Germany's planning offices, oil officers and industrial planners confirmed what frontline commanders already sensed. Emergency measures, alternate fuels, rationing, local production produced only marginal effects. Synthetic plants that temporarily restarted seldom remained operational for more than days. Each American return erased progress once again. Speer later wrote that the oil attacks decided the outcome of the war. That conclusion was not made in hindsight alone. By September 1944, internal memos acknowledged what could not be said publicly. Germany lacked the fuel to conduct large-scale warfare. The collapse was not dramatic in a single moment. It spread quietly through canceled sorties, delayed movements, and engines left cold. And as oil vanished from Germany's war machine, its options narrowed to few and fatal choices. By the end of 1944, Germany's inability to recover fuel production was beyond dispute. Even when bombing pressure briefly shifted, damaged plants could not be restored to meaningful operation. Skilled labor was gone. Spare parts were exhausted. Electrical power remained unreliable. What repair crews managed to revive during quiet periods was erased the moment American bombers returned. Oil officers reported that synthetic fuel facilities operated at only a few % of capacity, often shutting down before product could even leave the plant. Distribution networks collapsed alongside production. Fuel depots were empty. Tank cars accumulated unused on shattered rail lines. The system no longer functioned as a whole. It had fractured beyond repair. Military consequences followed inexorably. During Germany's final offensives, fuel shortages shaped every decision. In the Ardennes offensive of December 1944, German forces planned operations around captured Allied fuel because their own reserves were insufficient. When those supplies failed to appear, armored spearheads stalled. Engines ran dry. Momentum died in silence rather than combat. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe existed largely on paper. Many squadrons flew only when directly threatened. Aircraft were hidden, not deployed. Jet fighters, once promoted as revolutionary weapons, were immobilized by the same resource collapse that grounded older planes. No technology could bypass empty tanks. German oil officers understood the finality of this collapse long before surrender. In meetings and reports, they no longer discussed recovery timelines, only how long remnants might last. The war was no longer about production or repair. It was about endurance, measured in days. Post-war assessments confirmed what those inside the system already knew. Germany did not lose the war solely from battlefield defeat. It lost because its industrial bloodstream was severed. Fuel, quiet, invisible, indispensable, had been removed faster than any army could respond. And in that realization, a final question emerges. What does it mean when wars are decided far from the front lines? The collapse of Germany's fuel supply revealed a defining truth of industrial warfare. Battles are remembered for ground taken and lives lost. But wars are often decided in places far from the front, in control rooms, refineries, and accounting ledgers, where numbers quietly determine what is possible and what is not. German oil officers watched this truth unfold, not as theory, but as daily reality, recorded in falling production figures and empty tanks. American bombers did not need to destroy every factory or defeat every division. By targeting fuel, they removed motion itself from the German war effort. Aircraft without gasoline became metal. Tanks without diesel became monuments. Strategy narrowed until only defense remained, then survival. What made the oil campaign decisive was not speed or spectacle, but inevitability. Once fuel production collapsed, no tactical brilliance could reverse the outcome. Power required energy, and energy could no longer be produced. In the end, victory came not only through firepower, but through understanding how a modern state functions under strain. The war in Europe was shaped by explosions in the sky, but it was decided when the pumps ran dry and silence replaced the sound of engines.